Hello, everyone. This is Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series amongst authors. So, inside baseball for writing, if you will. Always a good time, always fascinating guests, and today was clearly not an exception. Today, I had on the show Lexie Elliott, and I didn't know Lexie before I talked to her. Aside from whatever research I did on her. This person is fascinating and is quickly becoming a highly successful author. But on her road to becoming a writer, she had a couple different paths, including a PhD in physics and then working with Goldman Sachs in real estate finance. And, as you'll hear in the interview, when the global financial community melted in 2009, that ended her career with Goldman Sachs, and it gave her a chance to be introspective about what was it that she really wanted to do. And she decided, I'm going to write a novel. And kind of the rest is history. Her first novel was called The French Girl, and it did very well. And her upcoming release is Bright and Deadly Things, which is out February 14th and is a beautiful cover and a beautiful title. So fantastic stuff. And we spend some time getting into that place of like, how did you know how to write? How did you know how to write a novel? How did you know where to end a chapter? And just kind of reflecting upon, the importance of being a reader over the course of your life and just having that all kind of soak into you, as opposed to necessarily, deciding I'm going to take a multitude of classes and read many, many books about how to write and then hopefully structure it from there. Much more organic, which is exactly kind of the path that I took. I think it's important to just kind of go with your instinct, write a lot, write thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of words, and slowly figure it out. Obviously with feedback and everything else. But I think when you get into I'm not going to call it a trap, but I think if you're going to start reading a lot of books about how to write, you're going to see 1,000 different opinions, and I think you're going to lose the joy in writing, and you're certainly going to lose your voice if you're worrying too much about the structure and it must be so, because it never must be so. It can be whatever you want it to be. And, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's important to find your voice on your own, I think. So it was interesting talking to Lexie just about that path and learning as you go and getting that critical feedback that all writers need, from agents, editors, critique groups, that kind of a thing. So I think you're going to like this one. Lexie is a fascinating person, and I really enjoyed my conversation. This is my conversation with Lexie Elliott. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I've got this new microphone, which is slightly throwing me off, but if it doesn't bother you that it's in the screen, then brilliant.
Why is it throwing you off?
Because I've never used one before. So.
Oh, no, you sound great.
Just getting it hooked up was quite something.
Yeah, a good microphone is a worthwhile investment, I think, because I've had a lot of guests that were just like, they use the PC mic and it's terrible. So I appreciate you making that investment just in time for this recording.
Obviously just for you.
I'm flattered. Where are you right now? Where do you live?
I live in London, actually. I mean, I'm originally from Scotland, but I've lived in London for quite some time now.
Okay. And you can afford London, I guess. I've been to London a lot, and I always look at the real estate because it's fascinating to me whenever I travel somewhere, and it's just unimaginable to me.
It's quite something, isn't it? Yeah, it really is quite spectacular, the real estate market here. But yeah, I've been here since as soon as I finished at university, actually.
Okay. So, but you grew up in Scotland.
I grew up in Scotland at the foot of the Highlands.
Okay. That sounds like very, this is a very ignorant thing to say, but it just sounds very like mysterious and brooding and maybe lends itself to somebody becoming a mystery writer.
Do you know, I think so too. I mean, actually the landscape is really brooding and gritty. The mountains are proper mountains, and you have the feeling that really there's a lot of history there. Everything feels very old. You really do believe there could be Selkies in caves. You believe that all sorts of myths really must come from some grain of truth. So I grew up with that around me. And then I think, my teenage reading was a mixture of mysteries and then also a lot of fantasy stuff. And I think the two of them combined to give me quite a potent mix as a writer.
Yeah. Well, for sure. And fantasy, for sure. When you think about Scotland, you're like, okay, that could be Game of Thrones territory,
Totally.
To me. So did you grow up with siblings or?
Yeah, I have an older sister. 2.5 years older than me. But just the two of us and my parents.
Okay. And what were your parents doing when you were growing up? What kind of work were they in?
My mom was a part-time teacher, and she later became a teacher fellow, kind of teaching the future teachers at Stirling University. And then my dad was working for a kind of mechanical parts company, I think is the best way of putting it.
Okay.
He ran a branch in just outside Glasgow.
Okay. So no writers in the family.
No writers in the family, no.
I'm always interested. Like that's one of the even the reasons I started this entire show is because I'm fascinated by the writer's mind and how kind of the writer's journey. How did they become that person? Because for me, it was complete just this weird one day I became a writer, like when in my 30s, and I've always been fascinated by like why did that happen, and do your roots of creativity eventually burrow out through the skin no matter what. So where do you think were you a creative kid?
Actually, I want to go back to you there. So you didn't think you would be a writer before you were 30?
No, I was in business, and one day in my 30s when I was taking a class for continuing education, I posed myself a little murder mystery riddle to pass the time because it was so boring. And I just made up this one sentence riddle. And I was trying to think of a backstory that would explain an answer to this riddle, and I couldn't figure it out. So I got home and it just kept needling at me, and I just started writing. And in 3 months, I had a 400-page manuscript, and I had no idea what I was doing. Like literally no idea. Never taken a creative writing class, so the book was terrible, clearly. But it was a seminal moment, right? It was a moment that I paid attention to. Like maybe I should listen to whatever this voice is, and that was 20 years ago, and I haven't stopped writing since. So I'm always profoundly curious about people's journeys, because I have some guests who are like, yeah, they always wanted to be a writer. Their nose was in books since they were a little kid. They got their MFAs and just full court. And other people like, I just started writing because I didn't know what else to do. It's the range. So I'm curious to know your journey a little bit. It's particularly like when do you have a moment where you saw roots of like, this is something I might want to do or something I'm interested in?
I think as soon as I understood like what books were, that someone actually wrote them, they didn't just spontaneously spring into being on the shelves of a library, that was what I wanted to be. And I went to the tiniest primary school. We had 28 pupils between the ages of 5 and 12. Wow. So my year group was 4 people, right? Wow. This is a tiny rural primary school. And it was fantastic because you have to be very good at handling kids with all sorts of different needs and interests and passions as a teacher, because you've got like such a range, so the fact that I wanted to read all the time and love books was very much something that could be accommodated. And we had this tiny little library in the school because it wasn't space, and so a library bus would come round every week, or maybe it was every 2 weeks. And I loved the library bus. Oh my God, it was amazing. You got to climb into it, and you get to climb into it on your own. And the librarian would like have special time for you and talk to you about what you wanted and bring out different books. And I just loved it.
Wow. That's a really great idea.
Yeah, it's fantastic for rural areas. They still have them, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, these library buses.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, you got to get them around to the kids somehow. But so I always wanted to write, and I wrote little stories. I mean, like I was writing stories about horses and things when I was 7 or whatever. thankfully nothing exists because I'm sure they were terrible. But I also was quite practical. I don't come from a background where, if I sat in an attic and wrote all the time, somebody would pay my bills and
Right.
make sure that I was fed. That wasn't going to happen.
You weren't a fanciful family.
No, I was going to have to make my own way, shall we say. And when it came to, deciding what I was going to do at university, I was kind of tossing up, oddly enough, between physics and English. And my feeling was that I could keep going with an interest in writing and literature in my own time, but nobody keeps up physics in their own time, really. So I went to Oxford to do physics and then ended up doing a PhD. So I was there for 7 years.
Wow.
And I came out of that into finance. But always I've been writing in my spare time. But, when you start a job with Goldman Sachs, you don't have a lot of spare time, right? So there wasn't a lot of writing going on. And basically I got fired, as many people did, from that industry just during the global financial crisis.
2009, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I was at home with 2 young kids, and I just thought, and at that point I'd had a little bit of success in short story competitions. And I thought, well, maybe it's time to actually take this time where I'm not working, step it up a bit and think about doing a novel. And that ultimately became French Girl, which, was my debut novel.
So you're ultimately a Renaissance woman. Physics, finance. So my background is real estate finance. So I do kind of
interesting. Mine too.
Okay. Yeah. And when I was in college, that just, I went to hotel school, but I got really interested in real estate finance related to hotels. And I still work in that realm. And I do posit that there is a lot of creativity in it. It's all ultimately problem solving in a way. And a lot of for me, writing is problem solving because I don't outline. So I'm just trying to figure shit out all the time. And that's the joy of it. And same thing with finance. It is just, there's an answer there. You just have to find the creative way of working your way towards it most of the time. It depends. I don't know if it was like that at Goldman or not. I've heard stories. Goldman was one of our clients, and Lehman Brothers and Merrill Lynch and Bear Stearns. They were all our clients. And I remember in 2009 calling some of my clients at Lehman, and not only did I not get a voicemail, it just rang. And I'm like, when's the last time I've heard a phone just ring and nothing happens, like the 1950s? And it was a wild time.
Yeah, so I was in a hospital having a final kind of checkup before I had my second son. And my husband called me and said, Lehman's going under. I need to go in to sort this out. He's a lawyer. And he said, so when are you having this baby? And I said, don't worry, it's absolutely fine. I've just seen the consultant. This thing is not coming anytime soon. It's going to be fine. And literally the next day I had the baby.
Yeah, when it rains, it pours.
So I lay in hospital because it ended up being quite dramatic. I lay in hospital and watched the whole world, the financial world, kind of come down like a house of cards. It was a really interesting.
Once Lehman was down, there was no stopping it. I mean, it was,
AIG kept going.
Right. Yeah, that was wild. But I'm also kind of a little fascinated about a PhD in physics. And did you ever have a sense of wow, I should have done something with that? Did you ever want to do something with that? Did that somehow apply to your role in finance?
Well, in terms of did I want to remain in academia? And no, not really.
Because that would have been your primary option, I guess. With a PhD in physics would be in academia. Yeah,
and I think while I was doing my PhD, I suppose maybe even I should take a step back and say, well, why does one choose to do a PhD at that point rather than coming out of a degree and then going into, the real world? And actually, I didn't, as I say, come from a background where you had parents who were management consultants or, worked in investment banks or any of those things. I didn't know what those jobs were. and I didn't understand them. And my friends, I had a 4-year undergrad degree, and a lot of my friends were going for all these interviews in their third year because they had a 3-year degree. And they were talking about roles that just didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand that world, and it scared me. I thought, I can't navigate that. And I think a little bit out of fear that I wasn't ready to take that step, and also an understanding that, I was pretty good at it, right? I got offered a few different PhD positions. So, I was like, well, maybe I just keep going with this. But I think in my heart of hearts, I never really thought I was going to stay in academia. And whilst I was doing my PhD, a lot of people who were doing theoretical physics like me were going off into the city and getting, really pretty decent, starting roles. Right. And I thought, well, that would be a way to pay off the student debt. So maybe that's what I'll do too. And in terms of using the PhD, I spent 3 years modeling. I taught myself to computer model through my PhD. And it was partly because I was determined, despite the fact that I was doing theoretical physics, I was determined to come out with something that was really a practical skill. Mm-hmm. And that was the modeling. And okay, I wasn't modeling in the financial world in C++, but there's a way of thinking about things. And if you're just doing kind of stuff based in Excel, for example, my skill set there became very, very useful. And I also think the tools that you pick up, the self-reliance that you pick up during a PhD is incredibly useful in the financial world, because ultimately when you're doing a PhD, nobody has the answers. Nobody's going to get it done if you don't. It's not like an undergrad degree where if you're stuck on a question. Yeah. But if you get stuck on a question when you're looking at a past paper in your undergrad degree, you go and find a Don or a fellow and somebody will help you. But nobody can do that during a PhD. So you do become very self-reliant and, as you say, self-motivated. And those are quite good skills to then walk into the workplace with. And I always ended up being kind of the most technical person on a client-facing desk, if you like. And it gave me the ability, certainly after I had my first child, to come back into work in a part-time role, because I would parachute into deals, do some complicated technical stuff, and then come out. I wouldn't need to take it all the way from A to Z. Somebody else could do that, and I could just do specific chunks, which you could, manage better around having a family.
And it's interesting to me that, like, had 2009 not happened, where would you be? Like, you could very well, I mean, your hand was kind of forced a little bit, where, obviously it was a line of demarcation where you were expanding your family. So that's a major life shift as well. But the fact that everybody was laid off, it causes this massive introspection, right? And you took that, and I see this time and time again where people, like, something happens, and then if there's a writer in them, that's the time when they say, I've always wanted to write this book. Why don't I just write this book? I've got the time. I don't really want to go back into the workforce, or maybe the workforce isn't there right now. And so, but it sounds like you'd been writing short stories all the while. So you were always playing around in that field. So then you decided to write a novel. And then how did that physically take place? Like, because so many people, like, I look at other creative arts, like music, for example, and I'm a huge fan, but I'm like, I can't even wrap my head around the idea of writing music. Did you have a thought of, like, yeah, I could write a novel? I did physics, I can write a novel. Did you just jump in, or how did you know how to write a novel?
You mentioned musicians. I am incredibly jealous of musicians, because sometimes they write their songs in like 20 minutes.
I know. Yeah. Okay.
Like, that's a laundry cycle. I mean, that would be amazing.
A short one.
Yeah. But how did I write? I think that's interesting. I had that question from my editor when she first signed me. She was like, how did you know where to break the chapters? How did you know?
Right, exactly.
I think if you read enough, you have a sense for the shape of things, and when something needs to happen, when is the right place for a break. I mean, I keep an eye on the word count for chapter breaks, which I'm sure most people do. You kind of don't want to have like an 8,000 word chapter unless you're going for some particularly
mine are like
literary
500 word chapters.
Oh wow, okay.
Because it changes the pacing. You get a sense of that over time. And it changes over time how your voice and your pacing.
Yeah, and I just think that when people say if you want to be a writer, read, I think that's right. You need to read enough so that it's just in there. And I would say the bulk of my education in that respect was up to about the age of 24 or so, where I read and read and read and read and read. And now the more I write, the less I read. I feel occasionally like
100%. Yeah, it's terrible.
I'm like the least well-read writer.
No, you're talking to the least well-read.
Oh. Good. I'm glad there's someone else who does this.
Cormac McCarthy's new book, and it's taking me over a month because I only read in bed at night, and I'm exhausted. Yeah. And it's 3 pages, and then I got So
I'm with you. And if you're writing, I like many authors find that I pick up the voice of what I'm reading in my writing, and then you have to you read a Jack Reacher and you go back and have to take out your staccato sentences all over the place. It's just painful.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating to me. But so you didn't dive in and started reading book after book about how to write a novel. I
read a couple, I think.
Yeah, me too.
And I went to 1 or 2 kind of writers' festivals where they would do things on craft. And I think what that did was really bring to a fore and sometimes put a name to something which I intuitively knew from my reading. I'd go, oh, yes, that makes sense. Yes, I understand that. And you have to, I suppose, get to a point where you have the craft, but it's internal as opposed to, oh, wait, let me just look up what they say on that page.
Right.
You can't constantly be referring to something. Yes, exactly.
I find, and maybe I think I come from writing from a place of deep insecurity because I didn't know what I was doing. And I read a couple books.
Don't we all?
Yeah, we 100%. Writers are the most insecure people. And and I read a couple books on writing, but I find that stuff very off-putting. And same thing with going to a conference and all the panels about how to create tension, because it could be a million different answers. And then all of a sudden you're thinking about it as opposed to just letting it come out of you. And then hopefully in the editing, you go through and kind of shape things up. But I find that if you make it too formulaic, first, it takes all the joy out of it. And certainly for me, it does. If I try to think okay, here's my hero's journey, here's the 3-part story, and this has to happen. And I also think you lose just kind of your voice if you study how to. Because I never studied it. Maybe that's the easy thing for me to say. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yes, I often feel when I go to some of those things and you hear people talking about the craft, I think you have to feel it. And maybe you don't get it right in draft 1. Maybe you read that over and think, wow, I've really messed up this pacing, or the voice isn't strong or whatever. But that's just editing. Right. You're going to go through and you're going to clean it up and you're going to do better. I had an interesting time recently. I went into a couple of local schools just to do some stuff with them. And these are much younger kids, 10, 11, right? I'm not trying to sell them my books. They really shouldn't be reading my books.
Right.
It was just so that they could talk to a writer. I mean, I think if people don't speak to writers, then they never think they can be one.
Right.
And we did some exercises in suspense writing, and it's really interesting. I mean, what they're teaching them at age 10, 11 is all you kind of need to know, show, don't tell, slow it down, concentrate on the journey of the person. A ghost story, for example, is not about the ghost, it's about your reaction to the ghost, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
They do it at, 10, 11, and people understand it perfectly. So do you need...
So that's all you need, yeah.
Abundant lessons in craft, at all these festivals? I don't know. Maybe you need a few as a refresher. That's how I felt.
Yeah, and you need not only do you need to read a lot, you need to write a lot. And I say this all the time. My first 3 books never sold, and I didn't really have a huge problem with that. I'm like, okay, well, I enjoy writing books, so I'll just keep going. But you learn over time, and you get feedback, and once your agent and your editor start giving you feedback, then you're like, oh, okay, now I'm kind of I'm seeing it through your lens, and that's helpful. But they're not telling you what to do. They're telling you what they have issues with, how it hit them, and let you kind of sit with that. And on the other end of the spectrum, I'm, the one thing I will research and I'll go to any panel about, I love learning about the industry because I'm a business person and you are too. And I'm like, how does this industry work? How do they make money? How do authors sell? So I'll go to anything about that because I find I'm continuously learning about this very confusing and very humbling industry. Have you been, coming, it wasn't that long ago that you started publishing. Have you been like trying to figure out how does this all work? and is this normal? Is this not normal?
Yeah, I mean, it is quite an education. Your first book getting published is a real education.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wow, this is a kind of messed up industry, right? I mean, you're going to take 100 balls and throw mud at them and hope that they stick on one, right? This is and nobody knows.
It's not scientific.
It's not scientific. And unless you have someone who already has a really high profile, Prince Harry, you don't know that something is going to sell. So really, really, really difficult industry to get your head wrapped around. And I think one of the things that is both reassuring and disheartening is that really good stuff doesn't necessarily sell and really bad stuff can sell, and nobody really quite knows why that works that way. And I think I'm a little different to you in the sense that I try not to focus too much on how much you're selling or, that kind of thing. I'm like, I would write even if no one was going to read it. I'd write if I'm never published again. Now, I really hope that whatever I write is always going to be published, but, and probably I'd keep writing in the hope that it would be published someday, but that I would never stop writing. And so I have to write to a certain extent what feels good to me. And sometimes I recognize things that would maybe be more commercial than the way in which I write, but I don't think I can do that. And I don't think it would be authentic for me.
Yeah. And your readers would know I'm the exact same way. So I never look at my sales numbers. I just get the checks from the agent and she tells me and I'm like, okay, because it's confusing to me anyway. But I write standalone.
Very confusing, those statements.
It's very confusing. And I only write standalone novels. So I'm not interested. I'm like, I'd probably make more money if I wrote a series, but that just doesn't interest me. And I've had problems with my editors saying like, I write something that's a little bit different and we don't know what to do with this. I'm like, I know. When I was writing this, I knew you were going to say that, but I still wanted to write it. So there's a lot of edits and stuff like that. But, again, it comes down to the joy of it. It's like, this is the story I think I want to tell. And I don't know where it's going. And it might go in a place that doesn't make any sense, but let me just have fun and see what happens. And then you can yell at me later.
So my agent is brilliant. And she said to me once, and it really stuck with me. She said, life's too short to write books you don't want to write. And I'm like, it's so much
exactly
work. Right.
I mean, writing is hard. Why would you want to make it into something that's unenjoyable while being difficult at the same time? I mean, I look forward to writing. I write it in the evenings and I look forward to it all day because I get to sit down and escape. And if it were like homework every day and, you have your formulate plot points, that wouldn't entice me. It's just, I'd rather have my books not sell, in a way. I say that easy, frivolously, but I think it is true.
And so what time in the evening do you sit down to write? I'm really interested in this.
5 o'clock. I only write for an hour a day. Because
it's 5 o'clock here.
Oh, exactly. So
it's always 5 o'clock somewhere.
If I were you right now, I'd have my vodka gimlet and I'd be locked away in this kind of like closet room off of my master bedroom that has a view over kind of some open space. and I'm just there for an hour. And I'm like, where was I? What's happening? What should happen? And then I'm done. And if I do that, I can get a book done, in a year, fully edited and proofed and ready to send off to my editor. So, but it's hard for me to write more than that just because of all my commitments. What is your schedule like?
It's, yeah, it depends, day to day and what's going on. At the moment, for example, the kids are away at school, they go to boarding schools, so it's a little freer. I almost always start with exercise and get that done. And then I usually get done anything that's pressing, car insurance and, all those kind of things. And because and maybe there's some kind of admin stuff almost for writing as well, like, anything social media, newsletter, whatever.
Right.
But once I go into that land, it can be hard to get out. It depends. So I've been writing something in a different genre, just on the side, and it's more the fantasy genre, and I find it very hard to dig myself out of that. And I can kind of be lost for the rest of the day. So you need to get everything done. Wow. But if I'm writing psychological thrillers, there's definitely a point at which I'm like, I can't write another thing that makes sense. And sometimes that's, 4:00, and sometimes that's 6:00, and sometimes it's 2:00. And when I'm writing those, I find that I have this massive word count at the end, and I can really, really crank it out. But at the beginning, because I think I'm structuring as well, so I'm really thinking about all the threads. And sometimes I might only do, 500 words in a day, but I've sat there for 4 hours, Right. It can be really, really slow. But that's very much that kind of first section as you're putting all the building blocks in place.
Yeah, it's the thinking that kills you, right? Because like exercise, I say this a lot, like exercise, because I almost every day I work out, and over time, over years, it gets easier. You see results. And the same thing with writing. Like I remember when I first started writing, like writing sentences was painful. Like I didn't know kind of how to do it. Like, and now like the writing physically is very easy. It comes to me, but what to write is the struggle. So when I'm sitting down, it's almost like that. It's like, what happens next? And if I think about what does that look like, and then I have to just visualize it cinematically. So I'm like, okay, now, and then the 500 words takes 20 minutes, so it's weird. But I don't outline it all. So I usually don't know what's happening.
And your publisher doesn't ask you to outline?
No, wow. I will give them a
Did
very
they try?
I tried to outline, and it just doesn't. I immediately deviate from it because I always think of something more interesting in the moment, and it usually things are like, what if this guy just died right now? I'm like, oh, that would be interesting, and I kill him, and it becomes a totally different story, a better one, I think. But I never would have been able to sit down and think that that's what was necessary to happen ahead of time. So I'm fascinated by people who outline, because I can't. It's like writing music. I can't wrap my head around how people can visualize an entire story, especially a thriller with twists and threads and tension and, from the outset. Do you spend a lot of time outlining before you dive in?
So my publisher, apart from obviously the first novel, which they get, and you've finished it, right. My publisher has always demanded it. I mean, they don't need it to be super long, and nobody's going to hold a gun to your head, excuse me, if you don't stick to it. But I usually find that I know the beginning and I know the end, and I'm kind of fuzzy in the middle. The outline can help, and it can sometimes pull me back on track when I'm getting a little bit lost. But I'm absolutely fine with stuff happening that wasn't in the outline. And stuff does happen. Every book has got stuff that just wasn't in the outline, and goes a little bit AWOL, and that's fine too. But I think that it's interesting. You strike me as a writer who can't stand the idea of being bored writing, right. therefore it works for you to not quite know what's going to happen. And I definitely feel a bit of that. Like if I'm writing a scene, I'm really struggling with it and I realize I'm bored, I'm like, well, the reader's going to be bored too. So I need to come at this from a different angle because I'm starting to bore myself.
Yeah. When you start to write a scene that you feel is necessary but not interesting, you have to question whether it is necessary. Because
can I do this a different way? Can I jump into this in a different? Can it just be like I move to the next bit and then you say that that's happened somehow in a conversation?
And it's funny for me, what's ultimately happened is I write now, as I did when I started with a riddle. I usually just think of an opening scene and I don't know who these people are or why they're doing that, but this scene is interesting to me. And I spend the rest of the book trying to figure out that scene. And I see it very visually. And it's just like, it's like I'm watching a limited series on Netflix. I'm like, okay, then what happens? I don't know, but wouldn't it be interesting if then these people are over here? What does that mean? I don't know. And I just throw things at it. And then about 100 pages in, I'm like, all right, I need to start figuring this story out. But I usually don't know the ending until about 80-90% in, and then.
Interesting.
And then because if it surprises me, hopefully it'll surprise the readers, as long as you're not stretching things too much. But, we all change over time and voice changes over time. But why did you think and I'm sure you get this question a lot, get rooted into psychological thrillers? Was there, you were saying you were kind of reading some of that as a kid, but is that tension, that conflict was something that always kind of drew you in?
It's an interesting one because I don't think many people write a novel and say, here I have a psychological thriller. I mean, you write your first novel and then the publishing industry
tells you what it is.
And then your publishing editor says, oh, we really like that. We want more exactly like that, but different. And you go, great. What does that mean?
Right.
So I wrote The French Girl, got told that was a psychological thriller and they'd like another one, please. And like, oh, okay. But I like the structure of having a mystery because I think it's a really interesting way to keep a plot moving along, having kind of a scaffolding there that you can hang things on and look at other interesting things whilst also keeping things moving forward. Yeah. And, there's always other themes or other things that I'm exploring when I'm writing that, are maybe incidental or maybe very important to the mystery, but they're there bubbling along too. But the scaffolding of the mystery keeps everything together in a really good shape. And it seems to work quite well for me. And I think I like, somebody once described kind of literary fiction to me as books where nothing really happens, but my God, it takes a long time. And I don't exactly subscribe to that, but sometimes you do read a very, very, very literary novel that you like and you think is beautifully written, but again, nothing much happened. And as a teenager, those were not the books that I loved. I could love the language within them, but I liked it when something did happen. So I write novels where ordinary people come into extraordinary circumstances. I'm not going to write a police procedural because I haven't been a policewoman. I don't know what that's like. And like you, I write standalones because it's like, I've done that universe. Right. I'm going to move to another world.
I get to have a new world. It's exactly that. And I think with the psychological thriller, what I particularly love is that I think it allows you to really inhabit somebody very closely. I usually write first person present tense and get to see this world through a lens of fear and paranoia almost constantly. And you're saying like, what would I do in this situation? I would freak out. And like, I love the idea that there's just this menace that just exists until they're able to figure out how to get rid of the menace. And you can just have this like visceral kind of inhabitation of this character. And there's something exciting about that because you're safe doing it, but it's scary stuff. And I write some stuff and I go back and read. I'm like, Jesus, this is this is pretty, this is pretty brutal. I think I might have to tone this down, but it's just what came out, because I'm like, what's the worst thing that could happen right now? This. and you write it, and it's, yeah, like you said, ordinary person. You can, hopefully your readers are relating to that person. Do you tend to write from a female point of view?
I do. So far I have written, I mean, apart from like little sections, maybe diary entries or something, I have written exclusively from a female point of view. It's not that I wouldn't write from a male point of view, but I think there's certainly plenty of male representation in fiction, and it doesn't do us any harm to have some kind of smart female representation in fiction. So, and also I don't view, I'm writing first person present tense normally as well. I don't view these people as being me in any way. They're often much cleverer, much brighter, much braver than I would be. But I suppose there's an element of wondering if you put my husband, for example, in that situation, how he would react would be very different. And do I inhabit that fully enough to represent it on the page?
Right. But he might react differently, not necessarily because he's a man, but just because he's a different person. Right. I find,
correct.
Yeah, I started writing from a female perspective on my third book because I just kind of got tired of hearing, like, from people who knew me. I'm like, oh, this person totally sounds like you. I'm like, I don't want that. So I shifted, and it was just this world open to me because it was so much more interesting, and it was foreign to me, but I don't know. It's hard to describe. Like, as long as you don't overthink it, right? I try not to think like, well, what would a woman do in this situation? Like, what would a human being do in this situation? I think it becomes, and then of course my partner's a woman, and she's the first to read it. My editor's a woman, my agent's a woman, so I get tremendous feedback.
Yes, feedback on that. Interesting. I do have a story in my head that I was wanting to write that would be from a male perspective. So, I definitely don't rule it out. That's for sure. It's just certainly hasn't happened so far. Yeah,
the last book I did, and this, speaking of tense, right, and also speaking of writing stuff that maybe is not true to what our readers expect. What's going to come out for me in 2024 is I just shifted the entire novel from third person past to first person present, which took 5 months,
ages
to do. But it's from, but the perspective is a 21-year-old woman in 1987. So that's the reason I didn't do it first person present to begin with. I'm like, I don't know if I can pull this off. And then my editor's like, I think we got to change this. And I did it, and it totally worked. But it's weird though. I don't know. Sometimes, like, you don't want to I think overthinking is the hardest part, but I do like getting lost in people who are totally different than than me. And it lets me kind of explore that world. Like you said, like setting new characters in new locations. So, and your new book is coming out, and I was just looking at, that's one of the best covers. And first of all, the title is fantastic, Bright and Deadly Things. But the cover, I'm like, and that's another part of the industry that I always am fascinated with. Like, how do you come up with a cover? How do you come up with why is non-serif font the big thing with psychological growth? And will it always be that? So I'm looking at yours, and I'm like, oh, I love that it's a nice, happy, pleasing cover. And just the font, and obviously the title, makes it extremely menacing. and I'm like, yeah, that's fantastic.
I love that I got the title that I wanted, because to me it's not a given, right?
It's rare.
My first novel wasn't called The French Girl, and I didn't mind it getting changed to The French Girl. I thought that was a good change. And then my second novel had a working title of The Manse, which is something that nobody out of Scotland is even going to know what it is.
Yeah.
So I was totally expecting that to change. How to Kill Your Best Friend. I came up with that one, and I was pretty sure no one was going to stop me on that one. So, but Bright and Deadly Things, I was really happy to get that. I really like that title. I wish I had a copy to show up right now, but I don't actually have one to hand. But yeah, it's they do such a good job, the art departments. I love that I have feedback, and that what my opinion is actually listened to on that. I don't think I'd expected that to begin with. There's quite a lot that they do double check with you that I hadn't initially expected. So it's quite cool.
Right. But I think, and same, but a lot of times I'm just like, you know what? This is your world. This is what you do for a living. When they're looking at, comparable titles, comparable fonts, and they have a whole positioning statement for it. I'm like, who am I to say you're wrong? You sell books for a living. So sometimes I'm like, yeah, I like my title better, but I get your reasoning in terms of the market. And that's all necessary, I guess. So, but I'm very excited for this book launch, and I'm sure, I'm sure it's not getting old for you to have books keep coming out.
I'm sure it's not getting old for you either. Come on.
It doesn't, not at all. Well, we're going to wrap up.
I don't expect it ever gets old, right?
No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't. We're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a little storytelling. And I know this is what you were really looking forward to.
Yeah. What I was really terrified about.
Oh, it's great. It's a shit show every time. So so that's why there's like zero pressure. So I have 3 books. I'm going to have you choose one of them, and you're going to choose a page, and then I'm going to scan that page, and I'm going to look for a sentence that I think might be a good start to a story. I'll read that sentence, and then you give me the next line, and then I'll give the next line or 2, whatever. Very, very loose. And after a couple minutes, I'll call it a day. But
after a couple of minutes of silence, we'll give up.
Hey, that's building tension. I've got Donna Tartt's The Little Friend, Darcy Coates' From Below, and the lovely Claire McIntosh's The Last Party, which just came out late last year. So choose one of those.
Oh, I like Donna Tartt. Let's go for that.
Yeah, I haven't read this in a long time, guys. 600 pages. I didn't remember that was so long. So choose a page between, say, 1 and 500.
I am going to go for 311.
Okay. And then I'm going to quickly scan this page and see if I can find anything. I'm going to...
You're going to go for 312?
No. Okay. This is a good one. All right. Suddenly it occurred to him that Harriet might be dead, strangled, shot, hit by the preacher's truck, for all he knew, turning in right on top of her.
And if Harriet was dead, what did that mean for him? And what did it mean for the money? ? It's
a strange thing when the thing you dream of for many years becomes a reality through no fault of your own. And now, thinking that it could finally be, that she could finally be gone, it felt different. It didn't have the same taste of freedom that he thought. He kind of felt bad.
Harriet had always wanted something from him, and it was never anything good. He had expected that upon being free of that, he would have a new lease of life. But somehow he couldn't let it all go. He needed to go back to the beginning, back to where it all started.
He got into his truck and drove to the old farm. If she were dead, it would have happened here. As he pulled up, he felt the hairs on his neck starting to stand up, and it wasn't the breeze outside. He got out and saw that the barn door was half open, blackness inside. His feet crunched rocks and hay as he walked inside the barn.
He saw what was missing immediately, the axe. The axe that was always hanging on the wall. The axe was gone.
I think we're going to call it there. That was wonderful. That was a great setup.
It was a good starting sentence. You did well there.
That damn Harriet. She's always causing problems. Lexie, what a pleasure to meet you and to talk to you. And I really enjoyed just kind of talking shop and hearing about, this very interesting journey that you've had over the course of your life from different realms of creativity finally manifesting itself into. And what strikes me is you made a comment earlier that I'm going to be writing, whether people buy my books or not for the rest of my life. How many other jobs can you think of that you would inhabit that you're like, yep, this is me. This is until the end. Almost none. And sounds like you
Parent.
Parent. Yeah, that's a good point. But it sounds like you have found we have a kinship, because I just feel like, I'll be, as long as I can type, or make words come out of computer, I'm going to be storytelling, because it's just what I do. And it sounds like you're the exact same way.
I think that's right. It's been so lovely to talk to you, and it's really interesting to hear, other writers' takes on all those things that we all struggle with.
I agree. It's why I started the podcast, because I'm fascinated by writers. So congratulations and best of luck on your new release. I'm excited. And then I will, when I'm recording an intro, I will have the cover and everything, so people can see what a beautiful cover it is.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Enjoy your night. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
So that's it. That's my conversation with Lexie Elliott. I told you it was a good one. And I loved, I probably called that story too soon at the end, because it was really getting good. But I kind of like to end things when right before, the good parts come, because, I know, okay, I'm going to be honest. I didn't know what the fuck to say next, because her axe thing was so good. I'm like, okay, now what do I do with that? So I called it. But I think that would have been a great story. If you want to find out more about Lexie, and I highly suggest that you seek her out and you buy her books, just go to LexieElliott.com. Her new book is Bright and Deadly Things. I love that title. If you want to find out more about me, subscribe to my newsletter or check my appearances, just go to CarterWilson.com. That is it for now. More episodes of Making It Up coming out very soon. In the meantime, I always appreciate you all watching and or listening to this. So take care. Bye.